During World War II, the US and Russia put aside their philosophical differences to form an alliance and defeat the Nazis in Europe. With Germany defeated, those differences and hostilities were revived, and both nations jockeyed for position as leaders of the world. This battle for influence and world domination would set up the next 45 years of tension between the two superpowers. This module will help explore the rise of these tensions, the policies established by the US to counteract Soviet aggression, and the alliances that formed as a result. As US Russian relations deteriorate in the present day, it is important to understand the history of how these tensions first developed. After World War II, two superpowers remained: the Soviets on the side of socialism, communism, and totalitarianism, and the US on the side of capitalism, democracy, and individual rights. As the Soviets marched through Eastern Europe, pushing the Germans back, they were able to establish a military and political presence in the liberated Eastern European nations. Fearing that the US might try to invade the Soviet Union through Europe, the Soviets wanted a buffer zone between Western Europe and the Russian border. They established pro Soviet governments in Eastern European nations. These became known as satellite nations. In order to prevent another world war from breaking out, the United Nations was established in 1945. The goal of the UN is to provide a place for countries to solve disputes diplomatically. Knowing that a confrontation with the Soviets would lead to a new world war, the US needed a different foreign policy approach to dealing with the communist threat. President Harry Truman established a policy of containment that says that the US will not go after communism where it already exists, but will aid in resisting any attempts by the Soviets to spread it. He established this policy in a speech to Congress in 1947. It became known as the Truman Doctrine. Truman also established that the best way to prevent communism from spreading is by helping countries develop thriving economies. He believed that providing aid to rebuilding countries would make them more likely to prosper and maintain free markets. This idea was further advanced by Secretary of State George Marshall. The Marshall Plan provided $17 billion in American aid to rebuilding nations in Europe. In return, the countries that accepted the aid would align themselves with the US. This would set up the alliances that would dominate the Cold War. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was created as the alliance of democratic Western European nations and the United States. To counteract this, the Soviets established the Warsaw Pact, the alliance of Eastern European communist nations. These alliances would oppose each other until the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. The end of World War II led to the rise of the US and Soviet Union as superpowers. The Soviet Union and communism would dominate Eastern Europe, while the US and capitalism would gain influence in Western Europe. The policy of containment was established to prevent the spread of communism, and the alliances on each side would attempt to create a balance of power that would keep the other side in check. In our next lesson, we will learn how some early conflicts in the Cold War played out, as well as the continued advancement of the nuclear arms race.